Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending upon where you are today. First of all, I think been a great event so far, really interesting and overall great content. I wanted to take a moment and thank everyone for joining today's panel. I'd also like to welcome our esteemed panelists to join the conversation. I think as with all things going on right now, there's a lot of transformation and change, a lot of very interesting and unique opportunities in the marketplace. I'm very excited to be hosting this panel because we've got an interesting mix of folks. We're joined today by Nicole, Alan, and Guy, and we'll actually have them introduce themselves in just a moment. But you'll notice that the interesting mix from I'll call it investor perspective, an innovation and retail perspective, as well as kind of broad-based market trends that I think are very pertinent, both from a overall Israel perspective and also in the day-to-day operations of various organizations. Welcome everyone on the panelists side to join, and looking forward to a great conversation around trends in technology and in cyber and what's going on in the world. I think also just as a reminder to the audience members out there, if you want to ask a question, there is the Q&A function that's at the bottom of the screen and on the right-hand side to be able to actually ask a question of panelists. We'll save some time towards the end of the conversation today to make sure that we address some of those questions and really get a chance to make this interactive for everyone. So I think maybe to start, what I'll ask is if our panelists could introduce themselves and actually share a project that you're working on right now that's particularly exciting, and in no particular order, only because actually it's just how it shows up on my screen. Alan, I'll ask you to go first, and I think kind of from the innovation side as well as digital side for H&M, if you could share a little bit of your role, what you're working on, and really give us a sense, what's a cool project you're working on right now. And Alan, you are actually on mute.
There we go. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here and join you guys once again. My name is Alan Boehme. I'm the CTO for the H&M Group. H&M is one of the largest fashion retail companies in the world, with stores in excess of 70 countries. I joined in July after a few years at P&G and a few years at Coca-Cola before that, and a number of other companies. Coming into a company during a pandemic is very interesting. Coming into a company in a pandemic that's based in Europe when you're stuck in the United States makes it even more interesting. So I'm now working evening hours in the US so I can be on Swedish time for the rest of the company. So as we're going through our transformation, I think H&M went through an amazing expansion for a number of years, going from very few stores to over 5,500 stores today across all of our brands in all these different countries. And of course, prior to the pandemic, the majority of that was in store. Our purchases were in store, although we had an online presence. Now, we'd always been working towards an omni-channel environment, which is very important to us, as always has been, to meet our customers wherever we are. We're a very, very customer-centric organization, but the pandemic had to speed everything up, as you can imagine. So our challenges right now are the continuation of both expansion from a physical as well as a online state, really pursuing the customer-centric approach that we're known for. We're moving, and at the same time, we've been moving forward over the last few years on a platform of sustainability and a platform of social responsibility, and modifying where our roots were, which was in sort of the fast fashion industry. So that adds another layer of technological change. And before I joined, the company had also made the decision that it wanted to move into becoming more of an engineering organization and not just a purchaser of technology services. So all of these changes provide a unique opportunity, not just to impact H&M, but impact the industry as a whole. And that's why I joined. And any type of technology and or capability that supports those is things that we're looking at and building a strategy around and starting to execute against.
Very cool. I can imagine just the challenge of not only, not being able to sleep because if you're working, both country hours, but also you probably haven't met many of your colleagues just because the borders are still closed, in person, you're not able to get out there.
No, I haven't been able to get to Sweden since early last year, about a year ago this time. I'm I'm keep plotting my way to get there. And of course, the vaccine distribution in the United States is uneven at best, is what we can say. And I plan to be over there and relocate for a period of time as soon as I can.
Hopefully soon. Nicole, same question for you. Perhaps if you could take a moment, introduce yourself, give us a little bit of your history and background, and also what's an exciting project you're working on? What's something that's very much top of mind for you?
Hard to pick on that last one, but I'll start with the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Priel. It's an honor to be here with the group, and thank you for having me. I'm a partner with Ibex Investors. For the last 17 years, we've been investing in a multitude of strategies, both in the US and overseas. So we're a multi-stage and multi-strategy firm. That means we invest in public companies and private companies in the US and globally. And I lead our early stage Israel fund, where we're looking to back the most promising seed and Series A founders across all sectors. So we've been incredibly active in Israel for the last 10 years, and we've stepped that up dramatically in the past 12 months or so. So I'm speaking to you from Tel Aviv. We work incredibly closely with our portfolio companies and really try to help them bridge the gap from Israel to the United States and globally, where their ultimate markets lay. To that end, we're working on a very exciting project, putting together a world-class advisory board comprised of C-level executives in certain functions who can advise us as investors and work closely with our portfolio companies in their domains and areas of expertise. So if you're a CISO, we would pair you with our cybersecurity companies. If you're a CMO, you can help our companies on inbound marketing or outbound strategy. So that's a big value add for us and for our portfolio companies, and we're very excited about putting that together. We're about halfway through.
Very cool. And Guy, I know you join us from DTCP, which, as we all now know, stands for Deutsche Telekom Capital Partners. Maybe share a little bit of your background history and what's that one cool thing that's on your plate right now?
Sure. So DTCP used to stand for Deutsche Telekom Capital Partners. When we raised our second fund, 2018, that's already a multi-LP fund. That means we have more than one investor. And we basically went with the acronym, which also stands for Digital Transformation, Cloud, and Platforms, which is what we focus on.
That makes perfect sense.
Of course it does, right? So we're a growth fund. And we have the German roots, as you alluded, but we also have a very strong Israeli presence. We have a partner on the ground and a nice team. And we're basically here in the US Bay Area. I mean, Palo Alto, our office is, for whenever that matters, it's Menlo Park. So we cover the entire kind of Western Hemisphere, and we try to think of ourselves as value adding in two ways. First, capital, everyone's got money these days. We invest right now in the growth stages where the big money talks and valuations are crazy, as you know. So we differentiate by being able to open doors and kind of facilitate relationships and business engagements across the world, but specifically Europe, where we have a very good network of enterprises and corporates that we foster. And we also work with the CEOs and CFOs on their numbers, because numbers really matter at the growth stages. So we're able to, we collect data from hundreds of companies. And by data, we mean dozens of different indicators and specific numbers that we can benchmark and compare and use AI. I know it's a big word, but we actually have a platform. So the biggest project we have right now is productizing that to the extent that not only us in the fund will be able to benefit from being able to benchmark and compare and figure out what's wrong and what's right, but also make that available to the CEOs and the CFOs of the portfolio companies. So think of it as a portal, as an interface for a technology company to know where they're at and how they benchmark and compare against the rest of their peers. So that's our biggest project for the year, other than fundraising, of course.
That's a really interesting idea. I think, it's something that's always come up. I'm curious, what type of indicators are most important for you as you look at that?
So as growth investors, we were always very obsessed with efficiency and all the efficiency metrics, how much you're spending versus how much you're gaining from it on all different counts and fronts. I should say, honestly, that the market has really taken an interesting direction where the only thing that really matters is growth. So the world is now a big money kind of seller's world. So everyone who has the growth is able to get the high valuations and the nice round dynamics. Within that, we're still able to figure out what drives growth. So expansions versus new logos, for example, which is very important. And we can actually identify issues or advantages that a company has in being able to sell more into its customer base. So yeah, we still focus a lot on the efficiency indicators and growth within a customer. But overall, I think that's where the world is going. Growth, growth, growth.
So it's always, I mean, look, it's not exactly anything different than any of the indicators that I think every investor looks at, right? But what I think is interesting, and you kind of hit the head on something. It's a question that I want to pose to Alan, because I wonder to what extent those KPIs are aligned with the way that, Alan, you think about bringing innovation into the company, right? From an external source. Obviously, there's the internal innovation stuff you're doing, and I do want to hear more about that soon. But, when you look at adopting a technology, let's say it's one of Guy's portfolio companies or Nicole's or one of ours, right? What are the things that are most important for you? And I think some of those I'm imagining are, check boxes that have to be hit to say, yes, this is credible and real. But, what is the differentiator at that KPI level that really separates out, the winner from the loser, the company that can do business with an H&M or a Coca-Cola or a P&G or whoever, compared to, the one that doesn't get that shake?
Well, I think, as you and I've talked before, not all technology is equal. Not all companies are the same. And certainly not all divisions or problems in a company is the same. So what I like to look at is, if something is truly a differentiator and is going to give me a sustainable, and sustainable can be 6 months or a year, but a sustainable competitive advantage for a period of time, I'm going to tend to go with somebody that's very early stage, very, very early stage. And I'm going to take the risk because it's so unique. And as part of my negotiations, I'm not going to let them work with my competitors for a period of time, because I'm not going to allow the knowledge transfer for me to be used against me. In other areas where I have startups where it is much more commodity driven, quite honestly, the startups are competing against the big guys because it is a commodity. And price and capability and support and consistency matter much more. And those areas that are between those two, a lot of it gets down to speed, agility, ability to solve, how quickly things can get implemented, but also how much of global support they can provide. I recently had a discussion with one company in the e-commerce space, and through one venture fund, and the fund said, you really need to talk to these people. And I said, well, here's the deal. I do have a need. I said, this company's been around for about 8-9 months. I said, you tell them if they can't support X number of languages, if they can't support 24/7 in all these different countries, they get one shot with me, and otherwise they're blackballed forever. Do they really want to approach me on this now? Are they ready to do it? Are they ready to scale? Or should they think twice? And
I feel like there's a lot of this too, right? And I think there's something that, and I don't know if you're seeing it, Nicole and Guy as well, but as I look at the reputation associated with particular execution, all it takes is one mistake, right? You have to have, from your point, Guy, 10 growth, 15 logos, all this like wonderful things have to go right, but all it takes is one mistake to kind of tank the reputation, right? Like, and then all of a sudden it's like, listen, we'll never do business again together, and Godspeed and good luck. But Alan, I'm sure you talk with your peers on a regular basis, and I'm sure these things come up from time to time, right? So, it's tough. It's tough to do it right.
I think you have to remember, if something happens really good and it's positive, you usually tell one person. When something happens negative, you figure it's going to be multiplied by 3 or 5.
That's right. And I imagine, Nicole, that's probably some of the purpose that you have around building out, this kind of advisory board and some of the things that you're working on, right? So what are the trends that you're using to kind of guide the direction you're looking at? Obviously there are multiple different sectors, I'm sure. It sounds like, CISO, CIO, CMO being very, very kind of particular ones, from a technology and adoption perspective. What's coming next? Like, how do we as an industry and maybe just as a collection of folks in a Zoom room on a panel think about what is that, you know, kind of next place to skate to? How do we get to where the puck will be, not where it is today?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it?
Billion. That's low. If you can
Billion,
solve that,
billion.
I got billions for you.
Yeah. It's a really good question. That's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about. More and more, and this might be quite granular, but I think it's a trend that we're seeing a lot, and I think it could expand to other categories and sectors. When it comes to technologies that are sold to the CISO or to the CIO, we're seeing increased involvement from DevOps. And I think that this is the beginning of a multi-year trend that is just, it's going to compound, and it's going to mean a whole lot of different things for early stage companies who are looking to sell into enterprises. So that's something that we're beginning to grapple with and trying to understand how to best navigate. So I think more and more parts of the organization that typically or historically didn't rely on DevOps to run POCs or to do integrations are now forced with that. And those groups don't always get along so well. So the questions for us are, what does this mean? Will vendors now have to kind of sell themselves on painless integration? Will they have to look for shared budgets across what is perhaps the security and the DevOps functions, and so on and so forth? What does this mean for serverless? Is serverless adoption going to rise because developers are wielding more power? So that's just an example of something where we're thinking 2, 3, 5, 10 years ahead, because it's starting to affect us now.
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting. There's always this lagging indicator. Every organization still has like an infrastructure team, right? But like infrastructure doesn't mean anything anymore if you're going to the cloud. It eventually will become a subsumed process as a function of DevOps. And I think, you know, I have particularly strong views on what I'll call the serverless side of the world. I think it's a great way to get locked into a vendor. Like the whole point of moving to the cloud and having a microservices architecture and leveraging Kubernetes and containers and everything else is to try and not lock yourself in. And so I think this is that effort of trying to, you know, kind of force people into it. But I am, you know, curious to see, because it does pose a problem from a portfolio, you know, kind of, or a small startup perspective, selling into an organization when you might have, you know, I'll call it the purse strings belong to an infrastructure side, but the actual, you know, implementer or the team that is really behind using it is going to be DevOps. And there might be a year or two lag in between those things actually coming to bear. Alan, within your organization, how far have you gone down the DevOps path? You know, what is kind of the consideration for, or what advice would you give? What advice would you give to those who have that DevOps enabled capability? How do you cross those multiple different disciplines effectively without creating turf wars and fiefdoms and issues?
So I think you have to look at any large, you know, company with a history. And yeah, I think DevOps was developed, and the concept of DevOps and microservices, it goes back to the days of Netflix and Adrian Apthorpe, and when he put that team together, and it was then moved on from company to company. But you have to remember that those were all digital businesses. And the reality is that most corporations are not 100% digital. And you have different archetypes of systems that you have to deal with. And therefore, DevOps is very good for new things. DevOps is certainly much easier to do for some customer-facing things. But many of us around the world are still burdened by large ERP implementations that have a lot of history and process involved. And I've been looking for the last 6 months to somebody that can actually show me how you can effectively do DevOps on an SAP system. It's not going to happen.
Yeah. How do you do agile with your ERP? Like, I mean, the reality is you don't want to. You want it to be as stable as possible, right?
Exactly. But that means, though, is you have to then redefine what the ERP is. And the ERP is for stable processes, which going back to my earlier discussion, means you don't use an ERP for competitive advantage. And you use it for very best in class type of activities. So I think that there's, you know, you look at any large company that I've been with, I would say you maybe get 10, 20% are DevOps available. The rest of these things are buried in others. Now, we still need to be agile. in ERP systems. You need to be agile in other ways. Maybe you do mini waterfall, maybe you do other things, but you certainly aren't going to be like a pure digital company, and that's the challenge.
Yeah. I think let me shift gears for a moment, because you know, Nicole, you used the term DevOps, and we've used the term DevOps now multiple times over the course of this conversation. But there is a term that I think has replaced DevOps that we did not mention, which is really the DevSecOps consideration. So, Guy, are you doing things in the security world? I would imagine anybody related to anything having even a glimmer of you know, relationship to Israel is somehow in some fashion or another doing things in cyber, and whatever that means as a market map. But you know, when you look at the security world, what are the major trends you're seeing? What are you kind of looking towards, and what are your concerns or your opportunities?
Right. So we actually overweighted cyber. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. I think cyber will remain an opportunity because the threats are just growing, not just in size and magnitude, but also in severity. So things are actually getting more acute, closer to home. You know, we see a lot of right now phishing attacks across our portfolios even, and of course our own firm. And there's a limit to what security professionals, security practitioners can do with the existing tools and technologies. So the next generation of cyber, you mentioned SecDevOps. So the operational side of it is very important, and we focus a lot there. And obviously part of that is automation. I think that the shifting left of things also means that many of the things that you used to do manually will be done automatically, and many of the things that you used to do yourself will be somehow outsourced, either to human beings or robotic processes that will figure out stuff before you're even able to know that something went wrong. So a lot of our focus today is trying to identify, and again, we go by numbers, right? Companies that are actually doing well. We do not need to double click on the technology before we figure out that this company is actually doing things right. And we have invested quite a lot over the past year in companies that are taking this notion of automation and outsourcing to the next level. So what we call MDR, Managed Detection and Response. And we invest in a company called Arctic Wolf that basically completely offloads your entire kind of tier one SOC work and does that for you, and does it very well. And we've looked at the IoT world and threats that are coming through other types of devices, not necessarily your typical network infrastructure. And that's going to be a big thing for us in the coming years. So just to finish that thought, automation. CISOs, heads of security for organizations, will tell you the one thing they have too little of is time. Right? They don't have time to respond, and they don't even have time to respond to all the vendors. One CISO told me once, I asked him, what kind of feature or product would you want? He said, I need a firewall to keep the emails of the vendors out of my inbox.
I actually know a few CISOs, what they did is they just don't accept any external email.
Exactly, right? But that's obviously not a scalable strategy if you want to innovate. So if you're able to help those CISOs automate those processes and offload some of that, I think that's where the money is, and that's where our investment is going to be.
Nicole, I guess same question for you. So the cyber landscape, what are you looking at? What do you think is a big area? Obviously, Guy has his predisposition towards, I'll call it, you know, SOC and automation. I agree. I do always worry that automation can often be a race to the bottom rather than actually, you know, taking things off of people's plates. Where it's a recipe for disaster, especially if the attackers start to get a little bit more sophisticated, right? But when you look at, you know, your portfolio, you look at the direction that you're kind of driving towards. What are the key kind of trends in cyber that are important?
Yeah, so I would focus on two. One is a domain, and for us that's cloud and Kubernetes security. So we're actually on our third cloud security company. The first two successfully exited. We made a third investment in the space early last year, and it's proven to be a good bet. So, you know, vis-a-vis the conversation about Kubernetes and microservices, the world is headed in that direction, and it's already there in many ways. So we're doubling down on that bet. And further to your point about kind of alert fatigue, I think a lot of security organizations are telling us, hey, you know what? We're drowning in alerts. Really just show us the top 10, show us the top 20 tops. We don't want to see 600 alerts. We have no way to tackle that. Let's just focus on what's really important. and the visibility as well that comes along with just understanding what a network looks like. The complexity is vast, and being able to map network dependencies and understand attack path vectors can provide a lot of value to CISOs and their teams. So to sum up, we really like cloud security. That need is only growing, and we really like, you know, giving CISOs back their time and giving them the visibility that they desperately are looking for.
Actually, sorry, before Alan speaks, one more thing, and maybe I'll ask Alan to relate to that if that's okay. One of the other aspects of security that is not typically dealt with is what happens to your content or your interaction with your customer. Think H&M, for example, from the moment that bit leaves your servers until it's consumed by the end user and back, right? So it could be your interaction, your purchases, anything you see on your screen, mobile or PC. What is the consumer getting, and is that real? Is that something that is potentially dangerous for them? I think many brands are waking up to the realization that what they're serving and what's being consumed by the consumer or by the user are two very different things. So one area we're focused on trying to find solutions in is how to defend that customer journey from the moment it leaves your custody or care as a provider until it's, you know, successfully consumed or completed by the user. And we have made 2 investments in that space, but we're still very open and looking for additional ones.
It's an interesting problem. There are, you know, a number of attacks that have kind of manifested in, I'll call it the man in the browser technique, the, you know, hijacking, form jacking, various different kind of things that I think, you know, everybody's really looking at trying to solve, because the experience does get co-opted. You know, the challenge, of course, is, you know, making sure that brand is not impacted, but then you've got compliance regulations, GDPR, you've got, you know, all kinds of things that look really bad on the other side of it. I often wonder, you know, some of these flaws I think are going to get fixed. So I wonder if it's a long-term investment strategy or if it's a short-term one where next couple of years, 3 years, 5 years, at what point does, you know, the W3C realize that, like, you know, JavaScript is just not a good language, and like we need to put some stuff around it that stops it from being co-optable, or, you know, things that are really in kind of redefining the way that, you know, we work with technology, right? So
I mean, I think the bad guys are getting better and better at what they do, right?
But it's, again, it's that question of, are we skating to where
the
the puck is, or are we skating to where it will be? And I'm not, if I had the answer again, I'd be, you know.
It's a longer session, maybe a 2-day conference just on this topic. I agree.
Yeah. Alan, what I wanted to do was kind of ask you from a prioritization perspective. So, you know, automation, alert fatigue, you know, the ability to kind of find the needle in the needle stack. Some of the conversations that I think are really around innovation in the world of security. I'm just curious, you know, are maybe taking off your H&M hat for a moment, because it's always a little dicey when we talk about, you know, security in an existing company, but you're a broad-based expert in this field as well. So when you look at the market, you know, and you think about what are people not doing or thinking enough about from a security perspective, where is that, you know, skate to where the puck will be moment? What do you think there's not enough energy and attention being spent on?
Well, I think, you know, what's sort of interesting, going company to company as I have, is the number one area where you can get the biggest value, and nobody, it's not sexy, so nobody wants to deal with it, is just basic hygiene.
Patching. Hygiene.
Patching and other things. I mean, if you get the basics right, if you don't have the basics right, it doesn't matter what new advanced technology you put on top of it, you're still vulnerable.
Yeah.
And
you
corporations in general.
No door, like, you know, or you left the window wide open, like, what's the point, you know?
Exactly. And this could be things as simple as if your Wi-Fi connections or Bluetooth connections are penetrating the outside of your building, and somebody can come in and hop onto that. I mean, that's a problem. If you don't patch your systems, that's a problem. There's just so many basics that corporations don't take care of, and especially if you get into the mid-market companies. You know, that's the real opportunity, but it's not sexy. It's not new. It's not going to be that next billion-dollar business. Nobody wants to come up with new ways to deal with that, because you can't sell it to investors.
Yep.
Hey, I've got a better way to patch a system. I've got a better way to block out Wi-Fi. I mean, but that's what's needed, and that's a huge market opportunity.
I literally talk day in, day out with CIOs and CISOs and CTOs, like literally back to back all day. And it's always the same answer, which is like, we just need to do our fundamentals better. When you look at like 80 or 90% of, major breaches, it's always the patching aspect. It's the, we didn't, enforce a password policy or, something silly, right? And I feel like, again, and I'll reframe the earlier thing I said, like, you have to be right every time when you're defending, and when you're an attacker, you just have to be right once, right? Like, it is truly asymmetric warfare. So, what I find, and I think is a good point, and for the innovators and the entrepreneurs and the people out in the audience who are listening, reality is, I think all of these investors are always looking for what's that new fancy, shiny gadget. But if there was some way to fix the fundamentals better, I think there's a lot more value in that right now. Now, whether that's 6 months from now, a year from now, my guess is it'll probably still be consistent, but I would imagine that's a good lesson. That's a takeaway. There is one interesting thing though, right? So, for all of the fundamentals of patching and, these security aspects that we've talked about that are just good hygiene, it's what makes attacks like the SolarWinds attack kind of so nefarious, right? The concept that somehow or another, somebody got into the software supply chain within the organization and then, basically pushed out a bad patch or enabled a bad patch to be, delivered. So those who were diligent and patched and were able to actually get everything, kind of up to speed, they were the ones who were most adversely affected. So I'm curious for Guy, Nicole, are you guys looking at all around what I'll call, fixing the supply chain security, software supply chain security life cycle? Is there, how do I build trust back into that? Like, how do we stop the next SolarWinds style attack from happening? And frankly, it's not like it's brand new, right? This is exactly where the same attack happened before with NotPetya, and, took down a major pharmaceutical company, for a long time, right? So how do we stop the untrusted patch problem? Are you looking at that space? Are there innovation and startups that you're kind of evaluating?
Nicole, do you want to start? I can definitely take a first crack at it. So at the time, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it was very popular to talk about the code and how do you secure the code. So down to the development environment of the developer, how do you actually, while the code is being generated or created, you identify the holes and potential risks in there. There's a whole category that formed around that. One of the companies in that particular category just raised money at a very high valuation. Everyone is very proud of that. Snyk, obviously. So I think that's Gen 1. And Gen 2, I go back to my automation point. I think a lot of that can be automated. I mean, unlike the areas where you say, hey, because of automation, we might be missing out on some of the more intricate stuff. Here, it's pretty straightforward, right? The form information of code is such that allows you to automate a lot of those processes. The other thing, which I think is connected to the DevOps movement, is where exactly are those vulnerabilities? Who's creating them? Who's basically in charge of making sure they're patched and pegged before they become risks? And we see a lot of the testing world actually kind of collide and coincide with that. So see many of the next generation testing companies actually look at security testing at scale. Again, the automation and here AI would play a very big part. So we're actually looking for companies that have been able to address the security testing with the automation part of it at scale. We made one such investment, but again, as I said, we're always open to look at the next generation and the best company out there.
It's almost like a way to validate hygiene or patch validation or software, like an extra step. And what's really interesting for me is it's so at odds with, for example, the Microsoft vulnerability. And it just seems like every week there's something brand new and terrible that ends up happening that is really kind of difficult. So if you think of kind of the context for a Microsoft patch issue, right, by having this 0-day open for even a day or two, all of these broadcast attacks that end up happening on the Exchange server mean that you have to patch as quickly as possible. But then take that, you know, if you had patched really quickly with SolarWinds, there was an organization that I shall remain nameless where the CISO told me we avoided the SolarWinds patch because, you know, or the SolarWinds attack because we hadn't patched in, you know, basically like 6 months, right? So like that's also bad, but for a different reason. And how do you validate the in between? To me, that's going to be a big space. Nicole, I assume you're getting involved in this space as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, here in Israel, where there's almost more cyber startups than there are people.
You can't walk down the street without running into like 4 cyber startup entrepreneurs.
Yeah, you're kidding me. We're actually in a building in like a 4-block radius where I think 90% of them are concentrated. So it's quite accurate. We're certainly looking into this space. We've seen a couple opportunities come up, and we are eager to invest into this trend. Absolutely.
Alan, is there just too many cybersecurity startups at this point? Like, honestly, it feels overwhelming to me. Like, and it seems like there's just room for consolidation. Like, and I imagine, you know, the challenge, of course, is that consolidation ends up being a very watered down, you know, version, right? You start to get, I won't, you know, kind of compare Palo Alto to becoming the new CA, you know, where good software goes to die, because I don't think they are, right? But at the same token, like the more of this consolidation that happens, it seems like a negative, and yet there's just too many cybersecurity startups, in my opinion. So how do you deal with that inundation?
So I think as you know, I mean, I've spent a lot of time working with the venture community. And I started the Bridge program with Gabby in Tel Aviv, so spent a lot of time, have a lot of good friends. But you know, and so please, I hope the investors there don't take this wrong, but a lot of investors suffer from shiny object syndrome. And you know, I've talked to many corporations, and corporations end up acting like squirrels, and squirrels chase shiny objects. And so it feeds the venture community very well to be putting as many shiny objects out there as they are. The reality is that corporations cannot ingest very many new technologies or new capabilities a year. Now, financial institutions aside, technology companies aside, they're just completely different beasts. And having been with a financial institution and tech company, I can say that. But the reality is you can't ingest that much. Although the consolidation may seem bad on the outside, from a business contractual standpoint, from an operations standpoint for a corporation, it makes life a lot easier because you don't have to manage all of the different pieces. Doesn't mean you're any safer in security. You may even be less safe, because once you have a vulnerability in one, as we saw with what happened with SolarWinds with Microsoft, it permeates across everything. And there still is a value to layered approaches, but there are just too many different choices out there that don't make a significant difference for the amount of operational inefficiency that it introduces to a large corporation. So,
you know, take
the complexity out.
What I want is not a company that's going to consolidate, but a company that's just going to be agnostic and come actually implement these things appropriately, because you're absolutely right. I think there's just so many shiny objects, and frankly, it solves a need. But then it's like, okay, move on to the next shiny object, and you know, now it never was operationalized, right? So I think there's space for more services firms, which I know investors generally never really want to kind of put time and energy towards, but like to come in and just get this stuff to work.
I got to say something here. You're right. I mean, we don't like services companies, but if you're able to render a service at scale based on a product that either you've built or integrated, this is a winner, right? Sure. So the ability to offer something that looks custom and kind of white glove to the customer, but is actually productized and automated to a large extent, I think that's the holy grail.
I sense a theme with you on automation. I feel like that's definitely the...
Again, right, I believe in machines. You know, humans are not very dependent.
Humans are imperfect. Machines are perfect. Let's move off of security. I think we've got about another 15 minutes left. Before I do that, though, I'll remind the audience again, there are certainly questions. I know I've got a couple up here, and I'll get to those in a moment, but do feel free if you do have questions for our esteemed panelists, by all means, happy to jump into those. I want to shift back to what I'll call really kind of the innovation ecosystem. Alan, you've done a phenomenal job at every organization you go to, establishing this kind of innovation, you know, funnel, this supply and curve, this, where do we look for innovation from the market and how do we identify innovation opportunities within the organization? It's always going to be, I'm sure, a challenge to get that cultural kind of switch to happen. But for you, what are those secrets to success? How do you drive innovation? What are the key metrics you use to say we're in the right direction, we are innovating, we are going, down the right path?
I used to joke around and I would say it depends on the number of cocktail parties you go to.
Fair enough. Not anymore.
Not anymore. But I can tell you that the number of events that offer virtual wine for you to attend is amazing. I don't need to restock my wine cellar for a year now. I think that innovation happens anywhere and everywhere in the world. We just have to accept it. And I think the key to success that I found was basically to follow the money and see where the investors are. Because if the investors are putting risk capital in, there's a better opportunity and a better chance that those areas are going to expand and they're going to grow. However, saying that, we're seeing certain specialties of technological specialties coming up in certain areas where you wouldn't expect before for them to occur. So somehow you have to blanket the world. I think you have to pick a theme for yourself. I've been talking for a number of years about the move to the edge, probably 5 or 6 years. I still hear people talking about the cloud. I'm not going to say the cloud is dead, but I think the cloud is old. And I think what we're going to start seeing is more meshed approaches to both analytics, meshed approaches to networking, meshed approaches to everything. And that's going to take us back to where we were 20 years ago when we started first doing distributed computing, or 25 years ago. So there's somebody that I met many years ago, a friend of mine, Alan Cohen, and another gentleman named Irving Wildowski-Berger, who was at IBM, and they put together a discussion on back to the future. And what we need to do is just look backwards to see where the future is going to be, because that's what happens.
Consistent. Virtualization was a mainframe technology, right? Like realistically,
Exactly. And so we can see this. We start talking about contextual networks. That actually goes back to work that was done in Xerox PARC 20 years ago. So if we learn from history, we can predict the future. Then we can apply that to those business problems for our corporations that have the most opportunity to advance. And the challenge we have as corporations is our competitors of tomorrow are not the competitors of today. That although we've seen these shifts, the major changes in various industries have been driven by people that are not even in those industries. Whether it's what's happened with cars coming from Tesla, which basically called Elon a software provider, to what's happened to the space industry there, Netflix basically changing entertainment forever. You start looking at these things. So the question is, where is that next change coming from? And understanding who are those innovators that can help you get to what's next, as opposed to just incremental improvement.
I think you actually bring up a good point, which is, in fact, innovation often comes from people who are not in that sector, right? The people who said, why is this way, rather than the people who said, oh, this is this way because it's always been this way. If I look at, and obviously these are the disruptors, that we always kind of talk about, but like Uber and Netflix and others that, really, it was just a moment in time to say, yeah, why don't we just do it this way instead? But I have no idea why we've been doing it, why that was established, right? So I also think innovation is one of those simple concepts. I love to talk about the ketchup bottle. It wasn't until this kind of, valve that was created for a completely different industrial function that had nothing to do with food, somebody realized that, like, the thing that people don't like about ketchup is that there's that icky, like, watery stuff on top. And the only way to fix that is to turn the bottle upside down. They went through millions of dollars of innovation and trying to figure out, how do we, change the bottle size? How do we do, they literally went through everything and said, what, they looked at formula. They looked at, like, every possible aspect, but just said, actually, if we just turn it upside down, that'll fix the problem, right? So I think those simple answers become really valuable too.
I think they're simple, and being able to take them across industry. I mean, as you know, I do angel investing and other things, and I originally saw an Israeli company that is putting biomarkers into plants and really creating IoT plants, and that just fascinated me, and so I've started to get involved with that. And I know nothing about plants, but I know about IoT, and I thought, now what else can I learn about this approach to changing genetics, and how does that impact other things? The same thing with quantum and security. I've been doing things in quantum and security. I've been doing things looking at patches that can detect DNA, or can detect coronavirus. But all of these things come together by having an inquisitive mind And then the question is, how do you apply it in other areas where it hasn't been applied before? And how can you help these entrepreneurs with your vast different experiences, help them grow the companies to create better opportunities for everyone?
Just so long as we stay away from the whole Jurassic Park concept of never asking the question of, whether we could, and start asking questions of whether we should. I'm not entirely sure why we put IoT in plants, but I can guess, kind of a directionality, but yeah.
It's what she actually has the founder has some wonderful ideas and some things that are going to really change the food chain.
Food chain, crop production. I'm sure there's a reason. I get the concept, but I always wonder at what point we play God. So I think one of the elephants in the room is the fact that we are not sitting on a panel in person together somewhere, that we are not physically located. On the one hand, frankly, it's great because otherwise, Nicole, you'd be, have to fly all the way across the country or across the world to get to this country when you're there. And Alan, you'd have to fly all the way across the country, or maybe we do it in California or whatever the case may be. But the point is, we're currently in a virtual world. And we had this kind of moment in time where there was this, black swan event. This hopefully is a once in a lifetime occurrence, and there will not be another pandemic as far as we know, but reality is it's highly possible. I think we're adapted for that. But what about the next thing, right? How can you address the uncertainty? Are there particular strategies of future proofing against this unknown major catastrophic world event that, either are, from a risk reward perspective, that maybe you're looking at saying, hey, we're not going to invest in that area because it's too rigid. Maybe that's, I'll call it office space, or maybe that's, strategies that are too kind of, set in stone. Or maybe, frankly, there's, new strategies that are kind of looking at and saying, actually, because we need to be more agile, this is the direction we go in. So I'd love to kind of get everyone's perspective on this. Nicole, I'll start with you. Maybe, what is that risk reward, and specifically addressing kind of what is that next big problem that could literally be anything?
So after what transpired over the course of the last year, I'm hard pressed to think of something, another black swan event that would really cause us to think, hey, maybe we should avoid this sector. My biggest takeaway is that we are snapping back faster than ever. If you would have told me exactly a year ago that the market today is going to be where it is, I would not have believed you, right? A year ago today, startups were huddling, thinking about how to cut costs, how to shed headcount, how to hunker down and conserve cash. So they let people go. And nowadays they're fighting for talent. I'm hearing it left, right, and center. Companies of all sizes and stages are desperate for talent. And if they at the time had the foresight to say, hey, you know what? This is going to blow over. This is going to be okay, especially us in tech lands. We're going to be fine. Let's take this opportunity to hold on to our talent, to retain them. And you know what? Let's go out there and let's swoop up all the talent that's just been pushed onto the streets.
But I got to push back. Did you tell your companies, guys, go spend money? Like, everything's going to be fine. Is that really what you said? Kudos to you.
We did, and it's in writing. It's somewhere on the internet.
Good. I had the same perspective, by the way. I said the same thing. However, there were all of these posts from major Silicon Valley investors saying, you need to cut everything. You need to literally just saying, weather the storm, shut down operations for the next 2 years, and do your bet. Basically really, really kind of catastrophic, naysaying. So kudos to you if you did have that perspective, because I think it's right.
Investors correct, Anthony.
Yeah, 1 out of every 100, whatever.
Exactly.
Guy, on your side, same thing?
Well, similar. I think skills and skill sets that are going to be required for the next generation, or even just the next pandemic, or just the next year, are going to be very different. So let's we're having a conversation. You sound very persuasive. You could have sold me something. In the past, you would have taken a flight and tried to, wear your best suit and try to sell me that same thing. So salespeople.
I'm still wearing my best suit, and I could have sold you remotely before anyway, too.
Oh, I thought it was fake. Okay, so in this, the world is changing, and the skills of salespeople, for example, right, are very different these days, or will have to be very different next year if you want to keep selling the same way you have been, or just to be as present as you thought you are when you're flying over and shaking hands with customers. So again, technology could play a big part here, but I think it also calls for a change in the way people think about interactions between people. And I'm not going all the way to VR. We know, that's coming at some point. So far, I'm not convinced that any of this is usable today. But maybe next year or the year after, we will be having this kind of virtual, quasi-virtual conference and have a feeling that we're together, even if we're in different locations. And the world is going in this direction. In general, I think that interaction between humans is something that is not being disrupted. Going back to the business card question, right? I think business cards have only exited our lives last year, after 150 years of people saying they should go away, right?
Despite like 10 years of technology in the interim, like where people are like killing it or sounding the death knell of it, right?
Exactly. So I think finally maybe we're done with that. Though people
I doubt it. They're coming back. I think office space is coming back. I think the business cards are coming back. I think the whole thing now, it may not be as pronounced, and I think there will be some innovation, but realistically, back to your point, Nicole, I think the companies that bought up real estate and actually like started, having physical office spaces, I think that is going to become a competitive differentiator going forward too. So
one more comment though on the interaction. I think human interaction is also our way of gathering information. And the flow of information, I think you were related to the pandemic. How do we know that something is coming? How can we protect ourselves faster, right? It has to do with how fast information travels and how could you fact check and make sure that what you're getting is actual and real. And that's a bigger problem. We're not going to deal with that. But enterprise platforms allowing the flow of information and a little bit of the soft kind of informal communication to actually persist, even if we're remote, I think is very important. My wife, for example, she's a program manager in a large technology company. She says she has lost her kind of superpower. Her superpower was chatting up people, figuring out what's wrong and where are we delaying the product, right?
Elbow conversations. Grab somebody by the elbow right after a meeting. Say, hey, just wanted to check on this. And those are so important. They're going to come back. I mean, it has to.
Exactly. But technology should be helpful with that. Yeah.
Alan, same question for you. And I think this will probably be the last thing we have time for. As you look at, and obviously no one could have predicted that in-store shopping would have shut down, or that we'd be in a global pandemic. What are the things that you are doing to future-proof the organization against that next black swan event? What are the areas that you're avoiding as you think about kind of that, next future?
Well, I think the company went through this very well. I mean, it was in fact we've seen online ordering pick up dramatically. We've seen as stores open, people want to get back out in the stores, and so we're seeing human nature come back and being very resilient and not necessarily everything's going to stay the way it was during the pandemic, but I think that in general, what's happening is there's a new appreciation, and H&M's always had this. One of the reasons I went there for social responsibility. I think a lot of corporations learn a lesson the hard way, that you have to become more socially responsible. I know one large company that was planning to be back in its offices May 1st and started bringing people back into the offices May 1st, and really pretty much ignored a lot of the warnings that were coming on about people congregating together, and all of a sudden people started getting sick. And it's because they didn't realize where they were in a social responsibility state, and they were more worried about getting back to how things used to be. So I think the lessons learned coming out of this is that there is no such thing as a used to be and will be again. That every organization needs to find its own way, that technology needs to start looking at being more fragmented, which is a good thing in many cases, and being very much decentralized and pushing to the edge, not just technically, but to the edge where the people are, and becoming much more responsive and proactive in serving the needs of the people. So I look at this as huge opportunities. I've met a lot of entrepreneurs that see things similar to I do and are creating some fantastic things that may take a year or two to really take off, but they're going to take off, and it's going to put us all in a better place in how to deal with these changes and these catastrophic changes from a societal standpoint as well.
I love that. The relationship between the employee and the firm and the responsibility from a well-being perspective, I think has fundamentally changed. And I think there are companies that are doing a good job, and I think there are companies doing a poor job. You know, as you look at the mental health of people who have to be inside all day, the erosion of boundaries of like working time and hours and, you know, locations and everything else, I think that it's really going to be a big competitive differentiator going forward. And I hope that more people land on the side that you do, by all means.
I hope so. I think there's a lot of companies out there that talk a good game, but they actually don't play it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of companies that we're seeing that are actually playing the game and are now can talk about it and help others. And then unfortunately, it's many of the legacy companies that are not keeping up in the way of the future of the world, and they're stuck in their policies and processes. Again, H&M was completely the opposite of that, and that's why I decided to join them, is because of their beliefs and the purpose and the values. And it paid off because it really paid off for the employees and the customers and everybody going through the pandemic.
Well, I certainly look forward to what's to come from H&M and from you, Alan, and certainly from Guy and DTCP and Nicole and Ibex. Really, really interesting. Appreciate the conversation. I can't believe it's already been an hour. It flew past. I could easily do this for all day. We will be actually hosting our CIO Summit in September. I forget the exact date, but it's at landmarkciosummit.com. I'm sure you all will be there, if not in person, certainly virtually, and we look forward to welcoming everyone again then. But really appreciate the time and energy, and thank you all for taking time out of the busy day to join us in conversation. Thanks, guys. Be well.
Thanks, Nicole. Bye.